So the first thing I need to tell you is that this is a wind gun Webley. It's not entirely standard inside. I've had this for a couple of years. I've made some parts for it and I've fitted some replacement parts from the Well Webley. The parts are largely interchangeable between the two guns. The Well is basically a clone of this. We'll make sure we know which ones are which, and I'll point them out to you if they're non-standard along the way. So the first step is to remove the grips. I've already removed the right hand grip. So the right hand grip, you just unscrew this screw in the middle of it, take the grip off and put the screw back in the hole so that you don't lose it. On the other side, of course, you just pull the grip off. It's just the spring-loaded grip that allows you to replace the CO2 bulb. You'll notice this one is filled with Play-Doh because I have made some replacement rubber grips for it that I'll be replacing that with. So you will be able to see probably that there are two holes here. You will not have these on your Webley. Those are for fitting the buttstock that I have made, which I'll attach a picture, so that you can use it as a carbine if you're doing a World War I loadout. So, to really get into the gun, we're going to start by removing the cylinder. So to do that, just break it open. You remove this screw here. Take that out. And then rotate the catch around. And that allows this part to drop down, which allows you to pull the cylinder out. This catch for the cylinder is one of the things that makes the original Webley design so effective. It allowed the cylinder to be held very securely in place when you were breaking open the revolver, but it allowed it to move freely when it was engaged and you were firing. As you can see, this one needs a little bit of love, a little bit of oil, a bit of a clean up. The cylinder and the ejector, quite mucky, needs a good clean and a lube. So you just unscrew that, and you've got the extractor spring, and then push out the extractor there. Now this is a weak point on the Well Webley. You'll quite often find that they crack here. Just the pot metal isn't quite up to scratch, unfortunately, but on the wing gun Webley I've not had any issues at all with this. So you can see there's two little guides in there to make sure that it's always correctly oriented, and the ejector and the screw just go back in like that. You screw them back up again. As you break open the revolver, that screw head is pushed by a part in the frame which allows it to push out the shells. It reaches a certain point and it clicks over that, and you'll see the extractor popping back in, allowing you to load the next set of shells. The next step is to take off the barrel section. So for this, undo this locking pin screw. You've got to do it from the right hand side. Self-tapping screw there, which we'll just put aside for now. Flip it over, then you can pull out the locking pin. Screw that back in so you've got fewer parts to lose. Break that and you'll see it comes apart. So we'll pop the frame aside for now, and we're now just left with the barrel section and the cylinder catch. To remove the cylinder catch, you've got a screw on each side. Undo both of those, and then it wibbles off. Knock both of the screws out. This comes off. As you can see, all this needs a little bit of oil. It's not been used for a while, and it has been sat in the workshop. Also, you'll find this part. Now you can see there, little spring. There's a little section in there that produces friction against the barrel rotating pin that we pulled out earlier. This part is the bit that pushes against the extractor screw head as you open the gun. As you can see, all of that is filthy. Needs a clean. It's all aluminium oxide or something similar. It's pretty grim, but I'll clean all that later. We're left with the barrel section itself. To remove the inner barrel, we have a pin here, and on one side there is a serrated edge which holds it in place. So you try and push it from the other side if you can. I started off with a punch and a pin hammer, and then you can either try and pull it out with your nails if it's loose, which it usually isn't, or you can use a pair of pliers, or you can use a very fine Allen head in your screwdriver set and just push it out. I find that's the best way for not damaging the pin. Pop that aside, and then the barrel should just drop out. Obviously this one needs a bit of TLC, so there we go. There's a bit of corrosion around the mouth there where the steel and the aluminium have been reacting with each other. The spring comes off the end, so that's the barrel return spring. That is what pushes your barrel against the cylinder, so in theory it should produce a nice tidy mating between that bit and the front of the cylinder. And that allows you to get something of a gas seal in order to push the BBs out at a usable velocity. Couple of comments on this. The barrel is non-standard. This is an AEG barrel. I turned down on the lathe because the original barrel is aluminium and I wanted a brass barrel. The brass barrel allowed me to put in this, which is a custom piece. So the original is aluminium on this. This is a 3D printed part. This is a prototype for an adjustable hop unit that I'm working on, have been working on for some time, which I'll get around to finishing at some point. You don't have a hop at all on the wing gun version. You have a fixed hop on the well version. The well, you'll find this is a sort of brownish rubber rather than aluminium. So you'll want to keep it nicely lubed up with lithium grease or similar in order to keep it moving freely. So all of that is going to need a good clean before reassembly. I'll pop that aside for now. We're going to put the pin back in its home with the serrated side in the same side. Push that home with the fingernail. It doesn't need tapping in yet. Finally, we can get into the frame itself. So you remember you put this screw back in earlier to safekeeping. You just want to take that out again. Pop it aside somewhere safe. Then we're going to take off the barrel cap. You've got a spring in this side, which you can remove by just pushing it in with the screwdriver and levering it out. So it's just caught in a little slot in the front. There we go. You can just take this off and then remove this, but this way you know where it is, you have control over where it's going. So we'll unscrew that now. We've got a screw in each side. And then that comes off the back. With that part removed, you can see there's a Phillips screw here, here and here. And those are the three screws that hold the side plate on. And we're going to pull those out. And the side plate just lifts away. And that reveals the internals. While we've got it open like this, we can have a little talk about how it actually works. You see a tow bulb goes in there, and then you've got this sort of transfer port up here. I haven't opened this part itself, previous to now. It directs the gas flow up here, where there is a release valve. So when the hammer comes forward, it hits a little knob on the back of the release valve and it allows a certain amount of CO2 out into the shell. Let's talk about how the actual mechanics work. They're quite close to the original. The first comment is you'll see that the trigger is a different colour to the rest of the pistol that I've got here. That's because the trigger is from the Webley. After about 2 years of incredibly heavy use, and bear in mind this was my main sidearm for my first 2 odd years of doing airsoft, and I did get a lot of use out of it, in CQB particularly. The sear wore out on the trigger, and so I dropped the weld trigger in, and it works just fine now. Let's talk about what the parts are all called. So we've got the cylinder lock, and that stops the cylinder from rotating when you are firing. You've got, that's part of the trigger. The trigger has a sear on it at the back here, and that's the sear that got worn on my original trigger. This is the hand which pushes the cylinder round when you pull the trigger or cock the gun. On the hammer here, so you've got the hammer face, which would be a firing pin on the original. Two sears. You've got your single action sear and your double action sear there. The double action sear is on a little spring, and you'll see why that is the case in a moment. When in single action, we cock the hammer. Just got to hold all these loose bits in when it's open like this. And as you can see, or you probably can't see from this angle, the sear on the back of the trigger is caught on the single action sear back here. And then all you have to do is to pull the trigger a smidgen further. That clears the sears, the hammer drops, hits the gas release, fires the gun. In double action, you are just pulling the trigger, and you can see possibly the sear pushing on the double action sear, and then it releases, and you can see then as I release it, the hammer comes down, releases gas, and then you can see that sear being pushed back by the trigger sear, which is why it's on a spring. As you pull the trigger or cock the hammer, the hand pushes the cylinders to the next slot and holds it roughly in place while the hammer comes down and fires. When you release the trigger and it goes back into place, the cylinder stop prevents the cylinder rotating another position. We're going to need to open this up and lubricate it a bit. I've had some problems with the trigger sticking on double action, so I'm going to open everything up, have a lube. So for anyone who's taken apart a gearbox, this will look fairly simple. It has its own sort of idiosyncrasies. I'm going to take out the cylinder stop first, because that almost fell out on my first attempt anyway. So that can come out. There's one less bit to lose. Let's try the hammer then. Whee, there we go. Right, so the hammer pops off very easily. I just flung the hammer spring over onto my lap. That's that little torsion spring there, and that tucks into the back like so. A little groove for it. We're not going to try and keep that under tension because it will ping out and we will lose it. As you can see, it's all pretty grimy in there. So that there, this little grey part behind the gas transfer port, is the hammer blocker, which in theory stops the hammer from actuating the gas valve when it shouldn't. So if everything is out of sync, that will block the hammer. Now let's see if we can get this out. Just inside, the trigger return spring, the torsion spring down here, is caught on a little catch inside, which it's supposed to be. So I'm just going to get out a little screwdriver bit, lift that up, yeah, there we go, and lift it, and the trigger lifts out. That spring is still under some tension, so if you just release the spring by pushing it off the side a little bit while it's under your control, you don't want it to ping off when you aren't watching where it's going. Now you can see there's another little spring in there for the hammer blocker, and if you want to remove it, that is the gas port. If you ever have a leak coming out of here, I had one after about a year of owning the Webley and not giving it enough lubricant. Dump a load of silicone oil into there, leave it upside down overnight, and see if that fixes the problem. It did for me, and it's been fine ever since. You can of course open this up if you want to, so obviously this screwdriver is not really big enough. So I'm just holding the brass screw head on in case it's under any tension. It isn't, so that looks like it's basically just a port to check that it's all clear for cleaning out and the like. If you ever have a leak from there, you may want to PTFE these threads or boil the O-ring in order to rejuvenate it. I'm not sure that looks like a particularly boilable O-ring, however. That is the main stripping of the revolver. You can take this part out if you like, just for cleaning. You can probably work around it if you don't want to though. So, just push that down and lift it out, like so. Then you just have to get in there with some alcohol or acetone, clean out all of the dirty lubricant and replace it with fresh. So to clean this we're going to use a bit of acetone, some cotton buds, or Q-tips as our colonial friends like to call them. I may also use a little bit of kitchen roll. Go in there, pull out any of the big bits, get a good amount in there so it can start breaking down the grease. Yikes, nasty. Not that these bits particularly matter under the functionality of the gun, but while you've got it open and you're cleaning it, you might as well clean it. At the end of the day, in my experience, if you leave a part dirty, then the dirt from that part will end up somewhere you do not want it. So you might as well clean the whole thing out. Okay, still a few little bits of muck in there, just in the corners where you can't quite get in with the cotton bud. If you have a compressed air line, you might as well use that to blow out some of these bits. Mine's in the workshop. The workshop is not the most comfortable place to do this sort of thing. And I think my wife would probably execute me if I brought my big dirty compressor into the house. Okay. Don't forget to do the side plate as well. Lubrication wise, you've got two sort of basic categories. You've got something like a 3-in-1 oil. That says anti-seize penetrating oil. It is 3-in-1 with graphite, this particular one, which is sort of dry lubricant is the best way to describe graphite. So even when the liquid part of that oil has run out, the graphite remains roughly in place and helps provide a little bit of wear resistance. You've also got something like lithium grease, which this one is a very warm packet. This is a high temperature lithium grease. This is quite useful for airsoft parts because on a hot day some of the silicone greases that you get and airsoft specific lithium greases can melt and run out as a liquid. So I've had issues where on a really hot day last year several VSRs which have been reliable previously all started slipping on their sears, and it's because the original grease that I'd been using had liquefied in the heat, run back onto the 45-degree sear I was using at the time, and just slipped the whole time. It wouldn't hold at all. So I now use that instead, and that does not melt. The general rule of thumb, you use oil where you can easily top it up, because of course it does run out eventually, being a liquid. If you can't get to stuff easily, then you use lithium grease, or grease of some kind. In this case, you've got a bit of both. You can top up oil through the holes in the outside of the frame, but there are some parts, like behind the bolt stop, that it's going to be hard to get the oil into that. So you could go either way. I'm not going to say either is right or wrong. I am going to use a little bit of oil for this one. So I'm going to use that one for the mechanical parts of the gun, and I'm going to also dump some fresh silicone oil into the valve section in order to freshen everything up in there. So I'm going to put a smidge of lithium grease on the back of this part. Lift that spring so that it's on top of that little shoulder. You can see it moving like so. The next bit, I think, was the valve. Next we'll do the hammer. Now, important to put the spring on. Now, I have to remember which way around that goes. I'm pretty sure it's that way around. So, it's all under tension there. Just be careful it doesn't ping out, go anywhere. And then it catches on this back of the gas feed tube there. So you can see that's now under tension. trigger group. At some point I intend to refinish this trigger group so that it matches the rest of the gun. I'm going to do that by cleaning off the paint and then dipping in hydrochloric acid, which I think will give a fairly similar finish to the rest of the piece. So that just clicked into place there. As you can see, that trigger return spring also holds the hand in roughly the right place, keeps it tensioned forwards. Try and slide it in, because that pin there has got to go into the hammer blocker. So I'm going to cock the hammer fully. Right, I have found the cause of the trigger not returning properly. It's actually not the trigger return spring. Up here, the hammer blocker is catching on the hammer. I've just cut out about 2 hours of me fiddling around with this swearing, trying to get it to reset properly. So the trigger return spring is fine. I have ended up polishing about 80% of the contact surfaces inside this. I ended up polishing around the hand, around this surface here which interacts with the side plate. I have polished behind the hammer stop in order to give that a slightly smoother run up and down the frame. What was actually causing the trigger not to reset properly was the trigger sear rubbing along this face of the double action sear on the hammer. The face on that sear was quite rough. It still had a casting line on it. I don't know why it wasn't causing problems prior to now. Maybe the spring has lost strength or something. I just don't know. So I have polished up that face and it is now all running somewhat smoothly. So now we'll pop the barrel back on. So again, undo that screw. I've cleaned all of this off screen. Pop the pin out that you took out earlier. Pop that back in. Just got to feel it so that the inner barrel is sat inside the seat at the outer barrel and doesn't catch the barrel return spring in front of it. That will stop it from going home. Now, pointing it down seems to do the job. So, securing pin. Oh no, it's caught again. There you go, onto downwards. Hold in the barrel. Pop in the pin. Pull it out. Let this flatten home. And the barrel will move backwards and forwards as it should. Okay, so that bit has just dropped out. That is the part which pushes your ejector out of the cylinder. So we'll just pop that back on the frame. Drop the securing pin through. Just line that up. The barrel catch on. Barrel catch spring. Snap that into place. As you can see, that's that all back together. So now, so if you're intelligent, unlike me, you will not have this nodule here outside of this arc. You'll have that pointing upwards. rotate that into position so it's lined up with the hole. Then all you need to do is pop your grips back on, put a CO2 cartridge in, and test that it all still works. I hope the video was helpful in servicing your wind gun or well airsoft or air pistol revolver. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch and I'll do my best to get back to you.